Book Club. Today we are going over The Wheel of Time in a short video. The entire Wheel of Time in a short... That's not even possible. I have no idea how I'm going to do this. I could spend days. I could spend days just talking about certain characters. Wheel of Time is such a massive series with so much that you can talk about that to keep this video short, I'm going to have to keep myself on task. I'm going to cover the 5 P's. People, place, prose, pacing, plot. Right? And I'm going to grade each one, and then I'm going to give it an overall grade. And I'm only going to allow myself 2 tangents. Or 2.5. 2.5 tangents. I think. We'll see. So the first tangent that I'm going to go off on is my experience with this particular series. It colors how I review the series, how I rate it now, so many years after I originally started reading it. I started reading The Wheel of Time in 1996, I believe. I was in college. Someone recommended it to me when I told them I had an interest in some other fantasy books. I think book 7 had just come out. So I picked up the series thinking I could probably finish this pretty soon. I mean, 7 books, right? That's a lot. That wasn't the case. It was another 14 plus 4, I think 18 years before I actually finished the series. Before we all finished the series. But that's a long time to be reading one particular series. I've reread the series a total of 9 times. And I just recently finished my 10th time through. But this time I listened to the audiobooks. One thing of note for the audiobooks that I really enjoyed was the fact that the 2 different narrators, the 2 different voice actors, pronounce things differently. So in my head, all these years while I'm trying to figure out how is this pronounced, even the professionals couldn't get on the same page about it. Now, I know some people might be very nitpicky about those sorts of things. It would bother them that it was pronounced one way and then pronounced another way later. Did not bother me at all. It was a huge weight off my shoulders. I no longer felt responsible for mispronouncing so much in this series. And at the end of the day, I ended up pronouncing most of these names actually quite well. Pretty close to what the voice actors did. So like I said, I started reading this series in 1996. I think I got to book 7 right before I went to Marine Corps boot camp. I read half the book on the plane on the way there. And when you get there, they take all your personal belongings and put them in a box. And you can't see them until you leave. 3.5 months later. So I read half the book on the way there, and then at the end of boot camp, my reward was, on the way home, I got to finish the book. I mean, that was just one reward. Now, the other reward was not being in boot camp, obviously, and going to see your family. There's a lot of rewards to finishing boot camp. The other tangent I'm going to go over is the author change and the effect it had on the series, but I'm going to wait till the very end for that. I know it's a big issue everybody likes to talk about, but I've got my own thoughts on it. I'll share those in my overall review at the end. If that's all you're here for, jump to the end. You'll see it. This synopsis is going to have some spoilers, but only spoilers for the first book and for the first part of the first book. How do you do a synopsis for this particular plot? I can't just tell you it's the farm boy versus the dark one. I mean, that's just oversimplifying it too much. 3,000 years ago, in the Age of Legends, an age hinted at and occasionally visited, but very rarely in the books, where there are all kinds of wonders, wonderful technology, magic, it seems. There's flying stuff, there's magic for growing things. It just seems idealistic, a very idealistic world. What comes into this world is the Dark One. I'm not going to say how, but all of a sudden, there's an enemy, and there's a war, and everything goes really bad. At the end of that war, there's a stalemate. I'm going to call it a stalemate because there was still conflicts going on for the next 3,000 years with the Dark One's forces. The Trolock Wars is a very good example. Something that's referenced in the books that was a titanic kind of war on the continent, but that was post the war in the Age of Legends. So there's been a stalemate with some flare-ups here and there. Cut to today, you've got a small farming community and some farm boys. You've got your wise old wizard, who is not really all that old, and very, very wise, far wiser than most of the wise old wizards, and not a wizard. It's actually a woman named Moraine, and she is the single most interesting, she's the single best female character I have ever read. I could spend days just talking about her. Immediately, these three boys, did I mention there were three boys? These three boys, because we're not sure which one's the chosen one. These three boys are in immense danger. The town's attacked, darkspawn, evil things attack, and they've got to get the heck out of there. Since there is only one way to keep this video short, let's get to it. Plot. Now this plot is fairly standard for its time. When it started, when the series started, it ran over such a long period of time that it began in the old fantasy world and it ended up finishing in this new modern fantasy world. And the series changed somewhat because of that. In a lot of ways, it acts as a bridge between old fantasy and modern fantasy. So it starts with a fairly standard plot. Chosen one, dark one, impending battle, farm boy must learn how to save world. But there are a lot of twists added in, a lot of changes to the typical tropes, and it makes it far more interesting than it has any right to be. Add to that the fact that there are so many subplots and so many other characters and other things going on that plot is going to get a boost. At its core, it's a 5 out of 10 plot. Let's be honest. It's a fairly standard plot. But because it was executed so well, and because there were so many twists that changed it, and those two were executed so well, it's going to get a bump for me to 7.5. 7.5 is the first rating I'm giving. I have to warn you guys, I'm going to be as objective as possible, which means my ratings are going to be lower than you're going to want to hear. If you are a fan of The Wheel of Time, understand I'm enthusiastic, but I'm also brutally objective on this one. So if you hear a 7 or lower or anything like that, understand I'm trying to be objective. At the very end, in my overall, I will tell you what I think. So again, if you're getting mad at me, skip to the end. When I say the farm boy has to go save the world, really he has to save all of the worlds, all of existence. So the scope of this actual story is much larger than most. And while it doesn't go into those other worlds very much, it does hit them enough to kind of give you this sense that there's way more going on, way more to this world. And you can't even say world, this universe that Robert Jordan created. The people. These characters are better, better rendered in the text than almost any other characters I've ever read. The reason for that has everything to do with Robert Jordan's immense skill at writing people. People are complicated. They say things they don't mean. They mean things they don't say. They do things they don't mean. They're all over the place. These characters are all over the place. It's called Unreliable Narrator. When the person you're seeing the story through, and you're writing in their mind, seeing through their eyes, hearing through their ears, when they're completely unreliable as to what's going around, that's the unreliable narrator. Or the unreliable vessel. Robert Jordan is a master, the master of the unreliable narrator. When you're seeing the story through the eyes of the character will be thinking things that are not in line with what they're doing. And they'll be saying things that are not in line with what they're thinking or with what they're doing. And people will be saying things about them that are not in line with what they're doing, thinking, or saying. There are so many layers here. I think this is why this series can be read over and over and over again, because there are so many layers that every time you read it, you peel back another layer of the onion. It's another layer. You'll see a little bit deeper. You'll see a little bit farther. You'll see a little bit more. There are a number of characters in this book that are quite easily in the top characters in all of fantasy, in all of science fiction and fantasy, in all of fiction. Some of the top characters ever written. I already mentioned Moraine. She is the best female supporting actress. What would you call it in a book? Supporting character I have ever read. There are a number of people out there that like to talk about Nynaeve and Egwene and other characters and how if they were real, I'd die for them. I'd follow Elaine into the pit of doom. I'd follow Egwene anywhere. Nynaeve is the best. But Moraine is easily the best. Easily the best. I'm going to stop there. Because if I don't stop this tangent now, I will have 5 hours of me talking about Moraine. So let's move on. Let's just say that that's one example of many in this series of the best characters ever written. So for people, 9 out of 10. Solid praise. 9 out of 10. And I'm taking into account the author swap at the end that changed kind of how the characters were written. Pacing. When you have a 14 or 15 book series, depending on how you look at it, pacing's going to be an issue. Pacing suffers because of how many subplots there are, how long it takes to get back to other storylines. Now, I hear rumors about a slog over and over again, and I have felt it myself in a few of my read-throughs. A slog where you're just like, oh, get through it, get on, move on. But in reading various comments about the slog, everybody complains about something different. I mean, people group together on various things, but there's a lot of different things they complain about. That tells me, and my own experience of reading it multiple times and not experiencing the slog and experiencing the slog and experiencing it differently different times, that it has to do with the reader's preferences, the reader's impatience and preference to watch other characters, read other characters for a while, and to read other storylines for a while. You may not like certain characters when they're in a certain stage of their development, in their arcs, and I felt that too. There were times I could not stand Rand. There were times I could not stand Perrin. There were times I couldn't stand a lot of different characters. Such a large story, such a large world, so much going on. And some of it's going to be more interesting to you than other parts. If you've read it multiple times, you might find that some parts that were boring to you before were interesting to you later, in later read-throughs. That was certainly the case for me. So I felt the slog, but not in every read-through, and not through this last read-through especially. I think I've read it through enough that I was just there to enjoy it, take it as it was, and maybe the fact that it was voice actors doing it, they were able to just keep, not the pace, but keep the tempo, sort of. Yeah, tempo. I'm going to go with tempo. It makes sense in my mind. The point is, I think people who are feeling the slog, it has to do more with their preferences and their impatience, which is totally valid. But I guarantee if you read it through multiple times, you will find the slog is there sometimes, it moves around, it isn't there. You will find more and more to enjoy. When I reread them, there was so much going on with those characters that once I was just ready to read about those characters and their development, once I was able to see into those layers of what those characters are going through, the layers of the unreliable narrator, and I was able to get more out of those scenes, the slog went away for me. So the score for pacing is 6 out of 10. It's such a massive story that I don't know how you could do the pacing better. I feel bad giving it a 6 when I've got no suggestions on how to do it any better than it was done. Organization, jumping around more, then people will get mad about that because they can't track. I really don't know. There's no good solutions. The next person to write a Wheel of Time like giant epic fantasy series, maybe they'll just knock it out of the park. Pros. I have heard a lot of comments about Robert Jordan's prose. It's good prose. It is good prose. But the prose does kind of affect the pacing. He can be a little repetitious about some things. He likes to describe things the same way over and over again. Maybe that's just the sheer volume of words. You can only explain how somebody folds their arms so many times. You can only explain a dress so many times without using some of the same descriptions. Or maybe he just does do this a lot. But my last time through the books, when the voice actors were doing the reading instead of me, I didn't feel it. I didn't feel it at all. Then again, I've been through it so many times that my brain has been trained to read The Wheel of Time. And I could just skip over mentally any of the repetitions. So I'm not a good judge of this right now, and I will admit it freely. I'm going to give the prose a 7. Because there was a lot of interesting things he did in describing fighting and describing things that I had never seen done before, and they were somewhat poetic in how they were done. They left a lot to the imagination without leaving too much to the imagination so that you're left wondering what the heck's going on. They didn't do that. It's solid prose. Places. 8.5. This is a huge world. Worlds. But it's very well explored. I guess over 14 books, 15 books, you can explore quite a bit. But they're very well developed places. If you say Camelin, I know what it looks like in my head. Ubudar, I got it. Tyr, yep. I know Tyr. I know where it is. I know what the people are like. I know what they look like. I know how muddy the streets are. I know what it smells like. These are very well developed places in a world that is itself really well developed. So for world building, I mean over ages of time, thousands and thousands of years, and how it's changed throughout those years. Rarely have I seen better world building. 5 is worth reading. 8.5 is must read for this thing. And I'm wondering if I shouldn't have given that a 9 as well as people. I'm going to stick with 8.5 for now. Overall execution of the entire story. What is my score? Well, my objective score is an 8. I would give The Wheel of Time an 8 out of 10. I would put it just at the must-read category. If you're a fantasy fan at all, it's like The Lord of the Rings. You have to read it. It's that important to the genre. But you don't have to struggle through it. I think most people will enjoy it. And I'll give it an 8 out of 10 objectively. And maybe I'm being a little harsh because I'm putting the word objective in front of it. Because for me personally, I give it a 9.9. I've never rated a book that high. I've never rated a series that high. I can't think of any series or book that I enjoy more to date. There are some that do come close. There are some that may rival it. Stormlight Archive, we'll see. Something else in the Cosmere, it has a real chance. But maybe not. Let's talk about that author swap. Mr. Jordan did not survive to finish writing the series. Now, he wrote a lot of what took place in the last 3 books, a lot of the overall structure of the story in the end, but he didn't have a chance to finish those books. So what the publisher did is they hired another master of the craft to finish the series, Brandon Sanderson. Definitely an absolute master of this craft of writing fantasy novels. But Robert Jordan was a master of the craft as well. And he was a master in his own way. He had his own strengths. And Brandon Sanderson is a master in his own right, but in his own way. And Brandon has his own strengths. And they are not the same. It is a difference in those strengths that shows through in the change between authors. That's not to say one author was better than the other, or one author is better than the other. They're both fantastic masters of their craft, and it's unfair to compare them. But they are different masters of their craft. So what they produce is different. Specifically, a strength of Robert Jordan is the unreliable narrator. The layers and layers and layers to every scene, to every character. What they're thinking versus what they're seeing versus what they're feeling versus what they're doing versus what everybody else is saying and doing and thinking in a scene. Robert Jordan layered these characters and these scenes so well that you could probably read this series every once in a while for the rest of your life, 20, 30, 40 times, and you will always get more and more out of it. That's where he's a master. Brandon Sanderson is a master of prose as well. But his prose is so smooth. I've mentioned it's like a Midwestern accent. You don't even notice it's there. But his words flow right into your brain and render the story without you even noticing what's going on. It is so easy to slip into his writing. Everything he does seems to serve the story, to include his prose. He's not trying to be overly poetic. He's not trying to be flashy at all. But his prose is absolutely masterful for all of that. Like I said, they have different strengths and different weaknesses. Brandon Sanderson is not as good as Robert Jordan at layering the characters, at the unreliable narrator, at getting all of those various layers involved. This is why Matt Cawthon, especially, a beloved character, didn't come out right. He changed immediately in the last 3 books. And he started to get better as you went. And I think the voice actors, by the way, did a tremendous job in keeping the same Matt Cawthon throughout. There's something about them reading it and acting it out for you where they're able to make up some of the difference. It was very well done, and I've got to give them kudos for that. But when you're reading the books, it's not the same. It's not the same Matt because he's not as layered. He's not as complicated. There's some layering. There's definitely an understanding that that's there, that it needs to be there, but it's just not as well executed. So Matt becomes somewhat of a caricature of who and what he was because he doesn't have the same depth. It highlights certain things about him and just a little too much. He's just not the same super complicated, lovable Matt that he always was. So everybody points to Matt being not the same and having changed. That's my analysis of why he changed, how he changed. At the same time, this reducing of layering, we'll say, helped other characters tremendously. I enjoyed reading Perrin and Rand when Brandon Sanderson took over way better because I don't think the layering worked as well for me. I don't think the unreliable narrator for Rand and Perrin worked as well for me. They were too brooding. They were too depressed all the time. It wasn't fun to read them. But when Brandon Sanderson took over, one of the effects possibly, or maybe it was intentionally, maybe it was time for them to start turning things around. Whatever the case is, they became much better for me to read. I enjoyed them much better. So on the one hand, Matt's not as good in the last 3 books. But on the other hand, some of the other characters are better. And the prose flows a little better. Because you've got Brandon Sanderson being the master of his craft, applying that to the story. So there are losses. And if we concentrate on those losses from losing Robert Jordan as the author, then we're not going to be happy with the results. But if we look at it in totally, and we see both what we lost and why and understand it, and what we gained, then I think you'll enjoy the books a lot better. I think you'll enjoy those last 3. That's not to say for those of you who have not read the series that it's a big change and it's really going to throw you off. There's really only a few things that changed. Matt is the big shining example of that, but the rest of it went fairly smoothly, almost completely smoothly. And I know there were some chronology issues and things like that, but they don't really spoil the story. You've got to jump back in time a little here and there, which is not something Robert Jordan really did a lot. I mean, when he did it, it was obvious. But if you've read Gentlemen Bastards or any of those others that jump in time all the time and unexpectedly, you'll be fine. You'll be fine. Objective, 8. Personally, 9.9. I love this series. I will continue to love this series. I will always love this series. And I especially love talking to people about this series. So feel free to leave comments. If you disagree with me, that is fine. There's so much to agree and disagree about. There's so many layers there. There's so much going on. I really dreaded doing this one. It was, how am I going to do a short video? Yeah, that was a problem. But, oh my goodness. If you mention anything about Wheel of Time, there are so many diehard fans out there. Hey guys, this is just my thoughts on it. Your thoughts can be different. It's totally okay if they're different. In fact, I'm excited when they're different. I like to hear them. So please comment below. Comment anywhere you can reach us. I would love to hear what you think about this review, especially more than anything I've ever done before, and what you think about the books. Please like and subscribe. I need some love. Bye, y'all.